Universes. Okay, so this is the term island universe. As being, the question is, well, what does it mean by an island universe? So go ahead and read this Urantia Book phrase.
In the not-distant future, new telescopes will reveal to the wondering gaze of Urantian astronomers no less than 375 million new galaxies in the remote stretches of outer space. At the same time, these more powerful telescopes will disclose that many island universes formerly believed to be in outer space are really a part of the galactic system of Orvington.
Yeah, so note the term galaxies and island universes. They're pretty much equatable in this phrase. And it really, again, it's the Revelatory Commission's attempt to anticipate usage. So the term galaxies, this is one of the 20 times that the term galaxy appears in the Urantia Book, and it's equating with island universe. And that really fits Hubble's language. This perfectly fits Hubble's language because they freely use that term also, island universe. So how to read this with 20th century eyes? Now that we understand something of the larger dimensions of the universe, these island universes can be seen to be part of the 1,000 or so galaxies that make up the Virgo supercluster or superuniverse. So what about outer space universes as visible and uninhabited?
There actually is a vast and new system of universes gradually organizing in the domains of outer space. New orders of physical creations, enormous and gigantic circles of swarming universes upon universes, far out beyond the present boundaries of the peopled and organized creations, are actually visible through your telescopes. At present, these outer creations are wholly physical. They are apparently uninhabited and seem to be devoid of creature administration.
Yeah, so we've already talked about the fact that the grand universe, the inhabitable part of the universe of all the master universe, is only 1/200,000,000th. It's tiny. And so here's a reference to it. But here's the term universe upon universes. As Urantia Book readers, we're used to seeing that kind of phraseology. To everyone else, it sounds silly. That doesn't make any sense. But if you think of universe upon universes as representing universe of galaxies, a universe of galaxies, it makes all the sense in the world. So when the Urantia Book uses the term universe of universes, and remember at the time the Urantia Book was written, everyone thought that the universe was the same thing as the Milky Way or a galaxy. The term universe of galaxies, universe of Milky Ways, universe of island universes, those make sense. So here we have clearly universe upon universes refers to galaxy clusters. Modern physics doesn't even begin, even though modern physics is grappling with the idea that there could be universes parallel to our universe in other dimensions. It would not allow for swarms of universes, the way that the Urantia Book seems to suggest. So let's talk just a little bit about some of the other people that were critical to Hubble's work. A major one is George Ellery Hale. He's the builder of the Hale-Hooker telescope and later Mount Palomar. Hale was a money guy, so here's Hale on the left and here's Hubble on the right. And Hubble is sitting in the chair that he's sitting in, this classic-looking chair. If you go to visit the Hale-Hooker telescope above Pasadena, the chair is still there. And Hubble would sit in that chair all night long. I don't know how he did it, but he would keep his telescope locked on. He was the great astrophotographer. He took great plates, and that's the reason he was able to do the work he did. But his telescope had to be built, and it was built by Hale, who was a money guy. Hale was a driven man. The first major telescope that Hale built actually is just north of Chicago, up in Lake Geneva. That was his first great scope. And then he went on to build this one. But Hale was a driven guy, and insofar as the Revelatory Commission needed for Hubble to finish his work, it needed for Hale to do his work. And there's a very curious story about Hale right here. So this is from a biography of George Ellery Hale. So taking a break.
Taking a break to relax, Hale traveled. On his way to Egypt, he stopped at Mentone on the Riviera. One night there, when he was sitting in his room, a little man suddenly appeared to him. They began a conversation. The elf-like creature was soon advising Hale on technical matters, fundraising, and the general conduct of his life. The elf appeared to Hale often during the construction of the Mount Wilson telescope. I was looking at a picture of a man who built a telescope that allowed mankind to take the measure of the unimaginable vastness of the universe and comprehend its motion of galaxies. It was only later that I learned Hale had climbed the walls at night, tortured by nightmares, until an imaginary elf helped him in his hour of need.
So don't we all need a little uplift on occasion from our celestial helpers, whether they be seraphim or midwayers or who they happen to be? Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun? So we have this poor driven Hale, and he is just driven to want to build his telescopes. And he gets some help. Apparently he was a curious character, very curious figure in the early history of astronomy. And as Urantia Book readers, we may have a take on why he was so driven. Yeah, so the universe needed him as just as much as it needed Hubble. Here's just another quick story. This is Harlow Shapley on the left and Milton Humason on the right. Go ahead.
In the Urantia Book, from Jerusalem, it is over 200,000 light years to the physical center of the superuniverse of Orvonton.
There are funny numbers in the Urantia Book to account for. And this is one of those funny numbers. And this funny number possibly has its source in Harlow Shapley and Milton Humason. Shapley preceded Hubble. He was the astronomer in charge before Hubble took over. And Shapley was not really willing to go where Hubble wanted to go. Hubble, he may have been Hubble's predecessor. Humason was a very interesting character. Humason was one of the guys that was the road builder to create the telescope, and he went on to actually work in the observatory, but he was uneducated, and he ended up being just one of the great astronomers up there, even though he didn't have a formal education. And he tried to get Shapley to go along with the idea that in fact the Milky Way was only one galaxy, and Shapley didn't want to go there. What Shapley did was, Shapley used the data that they were getting from their telescope to say that in fact the Milky Way was much, much, much bigger than it's now known to be. So earlier in the earlier slide, we saw that Andromeda was thought to be 50,000 light years across. Well, Andromeda is now known, just as the Milky Way is known, to be way over 100,000 light years across. Shapley, in order not to go in the direction that Hubble went, in admitting that there could be millions of other galaxies, said, well, maybe the Milky Way is hundreds of thousands of miles big. So, insofar as the Urantia Book has funny comments like 200,000 light years to the physical center, I think they're being forced again to rely on the science of the times, which is suggesting, as Shapley did, and he was a major astronomer, he went on to Harvard actually after he left here, to use numbers like that. That is part of the constraint. This one I don't feel as comfortable with, but this I think is part of where some of the funny numbers come from. It's the science of the times. So we have Hubble, an American. Hubble made his fellow astronomers crazy because he insisted, even though he's an American, he insisted on, he had been at Oxford, his education was in Oxford, he insisted on dressing in knickers and speaking with an effective British accent. And Hale spoke to elves, and Shapley resisted seeing the obvious, and the work of the universe got done in spite of it all. So, you know, the universe uses us in whatever form we're willing to make ourselves available. Here's another, just as with the Andromeda distance problem, here is the Mercury and the Moon apparent problem that troubled Urantia Book readers for a long time. And again, it's an old paradigm, new paradigm issue. So it seems to suggest one thing in 1934 and another to our age.
The planets nearest the Sun were the first to have their revolutions slowed down by tidal friction. Such gravitational influences also contribute to the stabilization of planetary orbits while acting as a brake on the rate of planetary axial revolution, causing a planet to revolve even slower until axial revolution ceases, leaving one hemisphere of the planet always turned toward the Sun or larger body, as is illustrated by the planet Mercury, and by the Moon, which always turns the same face toward Urantia.
Now, most Urantia Book readers, since we've taken up reading the book since the 1970s, looked at that paragraph and said, that's crazy because we know that Mercury revolves. The Moon keeps the same face toward the Earth. but the Mercury goes around the sun and it revolves around the sun. But that actually wasn't known until the 1960s. So it was only in 1965 that Mercury was found to have a very slow rotation of its surface around the sun. Now, the funny thing is, I've always been amused that the Urantia book even contains this paragraph, because it seems potentially confusing and misleading. The great thing about this paragraph is I think it's the revelator's way of telling us that they knew exactly what the score was. That in the old paradigm, Mercury kept its face toward the sun. In the new paradigm with the new science, Mercury revolves, and they used a language that could be read either way. I don't think this needed to be included in the Urantia book, and it was included, and I really think it was a fun way for them to display their ability to use language to tell us many things in many different contexts.